Imagine standing outside right now completely naked. No coat, no shoes, not even underwear. How long could you last? In comfortable weather, maybe a few hours before hypothermia sets in. But now imagine it's 50 degrees below zero. Ice crystals form in the air with every breath. Your skin would freeze solid in minutes. Death would come in less than an hour. Now here's the terrifying part. 20,000 years ago, during the peak of the last ice age, our ancestors lived in exactly these conditions. Not for an hour, not for a day, for thousands of years. And they didn't just survive, they thrived. They spread across frozen continents, raised families, and built complex societies while glaciers the size of countries covered half the planet. The question isn't just how they survived. The question is, how is that even physically possible? Because everything we know about human biology says it shouldn't be. Let's be clear about what we're dealing with here. This wasn't just a bad winter. During the last glacial maximum, average temperatures in Europe and Asia dropped by 20 to 30 degrees compared to today. Summers barely reached above freezing in many regions. Winters were unimaginably brutal, but here's what makes this even more impossible. Humans evolved in Africa. Our bodies are literally designed for heat, not cold. We have almost no fur. We can't hibernate. We don't have thick layers of insulating fat like seals or polar bears. When a Neanderthal or early modern human stepped into an Ice Age winter, they were bringing tropical biology into an Arctic nightmare. So what happened? Did our ancestors just tough it out and hope for the best? Did they huddle in caves and pray for spring? Actually, the answer is far more brilliant and far more disturbing than you might think. The secret starts with something prehistoric humans learned to control that no other animal could: fire. But not just fire for warmth. That's the obvious part. What they figured out was something far more revolutionary. They learned to make fire portable. They discovered that certain types of wood, like birch bark, could be turned into containers. They could carry embers wrapped in moss and bark, keeping fire alive for days while traveling. This meant they could bring heat with them anywhere, anytime. It was the world's first heating system. But the real breakthrough came when they started using fire in ways that seem almost impossibly clever. They would heat large rocks in fires, then wrap them in animal skins. These heated stones would stay warm for 6 to 8 hours. They'd place them in sleeping areas, creating the first heated beds. They'd even put them inside their clothing during the day, like prehistoric hand warmers. Archaeological sites across Ice Age Europe are filled with fire-cracked rocks, thousands upon thousands of them. These aren't just cooking stones, they're evidence of an obsession with heat management that went far beyond what we usually imagine for cavemen. But heated rocks can only do so much when you're facing a blizzard in negative 50-degree weather. This is where prehistoric humans made a discovery that seems simple, but required genuine genius to figure out. They learned that it wasn't enough to just wrap themselves in animal skins. They needed to engineer their clothing, and the evidence of this engineering is stunning. At sites across Ice Age Europe, archaeologists have found thousands of tiny bone needles. Some are so fine and perfectly made, they rival modern sewing needles. These weren't made for casual clothing repair. They were precision tools for creating fitted, layered, insulated clothing systems. Here's what they figured out. Air is actually an incredible insulator, but only if you can trap it. Loose animal skins don't trap air well, but if you wear multiple fitted layers with dead air space between them, you create something almost as effective as a modern winter coat. They wore an inner layer of soft furs, like rabbit or fox, against their skin. Then an outer layer of heavier, wind-resistant hides like reindeer or mammoth leather. The air trapped between these layers provided extraordinary insulation. But there's more. They discovered that certain animal furs had properties that seemed almost designed for extreme cold. Reindeer fur, for instance, has hollow hairs that trap air inside each individual hair shaft. It's so effective that modern Arctic explorers still consider reindeer skin clothing superior to many synthetic materials. Clothing solved mobility, but to truly survive winter, prehistoric humans needed shelter that could maintain livable temperatures through months of darkness and frozen hell. And what they built is shocking. We're not talking about simple caves. Archaeological evidence shows they constructed sophisticated dwellings that would have impressed any modern engineer. In places like Ukraine and Siberia, researchers have found the remains of structures built from mammoth bones and tusks. Why mammoth bones? Because in the treeless steppes of Ice Age Europe, there was no wood. so they used what was available. They would sink massive tusks into the ground as support posts, then stack bones to create walls up to 6 feet high. These walls were then covered with layers of animal hides, stacked so thick that the total insulation was equivalent to a modern insulated wall. But here's the clever part. These structures were partially dug into the ground. By going even just 3 feet underground, they accessed earth that stayed at a relatively constant temperature, even when the surface was frozen solid. The ground itself became part of their insulation system. Inside these structures, they maintained small, carefully controlled fires. The mammoth bone walls retained heat incredibly well. Archaeological evidence suggests that interior temperatures could be maintained at 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, even when exterior temperatures dropped to -40 or worse. That's a temperature difference of up to 100 degrees. But staying warm isn't just about clothing and shelter, it's about fuel. Your body is a furnace, and in extreme cold, it's burning calories at an insane rate just to maintain core temperature. A modern human in these conditions would need to consume between 4,000 and 6,000 calories per day just to stay alive. So where did prehistoric humans get that kind of caloric density? The answer is fat, massive amounts of animal fat. And this is where their survival strategy gets really interesting. They weren't hunting for meat primarily, they were hunting for fat. A mammoth could provide hundreds of pounds of fat. Reindeer, horses, and bison that lived in Ice Age conditions had enormous fat deposits that could be as much as 50% of their body weight. These animals had evolved their own survival strategies, and humans figured out how to exploit them. Archaeological sites show evidence of something called grease rendering. They would smash open bones to extract marrow. They would boil bones and skim off the fat. They would preserve animal fat in sealed containers for months. Fat contains 9 calories per gram compared to 4 calories per gram for protein or carbohydrates. In extreme cold, this difference is literally the difference between life and death. But even with all this technology, clothing, and shelter engineering, there's one more element that made survival possible. And it's something we rarely talk about. They couldn't do it alone. Ice Age survival required intense social cooperation on a level that might have exceeded what we see in modern society. These weren't isolated families struggling independently. They were tight-knit communities where every person's survival depended on everyone else. Archaeological evidence shows that they shared food on a scale that seems almost unbelievable. Large animal kills were distributed throughout entire communities. They cared for injured and elderly members who couldn't contribute to hunting. We've found skeletons of individuals who survived for years with severe disabilities that would have made them completely dependent on others. Why does this matter for surviving the cold? Because in extreme conditions, you can't afford to have knowledge die. If the person who knows how to make the best needles dies, and they haven't taught that skill to others, the whole community's survival is threatened. So they developed teaching systems, apprenticeships, and knowledge sharing that ensured critical survival skills were passed down and distributed widely. So here's what we're really looking at. Prehistoric humans didn't just survive conditions that should have killed them. They engineered a complete survival system from scratch. They invented portable heat. They created clothing that rivaled modern Arctic gear. They built structures with sophisticated insulation principles. They managed caloric intake with precision. And they built social systems that ensured knowledge and resources were shared. All of this without writing, without mathematics, without metal tools, without any of the things we consider essential for technological advancement. They did it with observation, experimentation, and passing knowledge through generations by word of mouth and demonstration. The Ice Age lasted for thousands of years. During that time, humans spread across continents that were frozen wastelands. They crossed land bridges into the Americas during periods when most people today wouldn't survive a single night outdoors. And not only did they survive, but they laid the groundwork for everything that came after. The agricultural revolution, civilization itself, all of it traces back to people who learned to thrive in conditions that seem impossible. So the next time you're cold, remember this. You're descended from people who conquered the most extreme environment Earth has thrown at humanity. The technology to do it is largely forgotten now. We don't need it anymore. But for thousands of years, that knowledge was the difference between human extinction and human triumph. And somehow, against every odd, they figured it out.